So Sony have recently released their brand spanking new Alpha 1 Mark II, which is positioned as their flagship camera that's the one and done camera for absolutely everything. It's positioned above their line of hybrid cameras, dedicated photography cameras and dedicated filmmaking cameras as the all-in-one package that can do anything you want for a wide variety of cases. However, this camera has been released about 4 years since the Alpha 1's release. Now, at the time of that camera's release, it was released the same time as the A7 IV, the A7S III, and it was positioned as the best camera on the market, and it was when it was released. But 4 years later, Sony have released so many good cameras in so many different categories that now we have to ask ourselves, have they just created one big problem that's going to stop you getting this camera? Well, first of all, let's look at this camera's specs and if it's for you or not. So the first thing you have to think of is Sony has such a wide variety of cameras catering to so many different people that you're going to fit into one of 4 different categories. You are either going to be using it mainly for filmmaking, mainly for photography, mainly for content creation, or a hybrid of professional work such as videography and photography. Now, when you're thinking about buying a Sony camera, you're going to want to think about all of these things, and these are the variables on why you're going to get it and which one you're going to actually get. Now, there's so many different ones that Sony have made that all have different specs catering to different audiences. Now, if you're a filmmaker, you're going to want a camera that has mainly filmmaking features and has better frame rates and better low light performance, and you're not too bothered about the megapixel count for photos. If you're a photographer, then you're going to want mainly photography features and a higher megapixel count so you can blow up the image or crop in more to get those finer details. And if you're a content creator, then you want something that can do a little bit of everything but it's not so over the top that you need those 50 plus megapixels for content creation. And if you are a hybrid, then you are going to want something like the A1, which has everything that can do the one and done setup. So the A1 specs has a 50 megapixel full frame back illuminated CMOS sensor, which is arguably one of the best sensors on the market. Now, they haven't gone for the global shutter option like they did with the Alpha 9 III, but it's still an incredible sensor. They haven't really changed it. Now, this can record video up to 8K 30 frames per second. So again, that's not been changed since the Alpha 1. And it can still do 4K at 120 frames per second without any crop. And obviously with that 50 megapixel sensor, you can take incredible photos that you can zoom in and crop in quite a lot to get those finer details and then blow it up as a big image to put on your wall or for client work. It also does continuous shooting at 30 frames per second, and it has in-image stabilization and all Sony's latest and greatest AI features, as well as that new multi-access articulating screen and the new menu system. So it has got a few updates, but not so many that I think it really warrants buying one if you already have the Alpha 1, unless you really, really want it and you have the money to spare. The other issue with this camera for me is the price point and where it sits in the market. Now, this camera, at the time of making this video, comes out at £6,300 which is around about $6,500. Now, for that price, if you want just one camera that's the one and done everything, then yes, you're going to want to get the Alpha 1 Mark II, because you can do that 50 megapixel shooting at 30 frames per second, because you can do 8K recording and 4K recording at 120 frames per second. And if you've got $6,500 to spare, then yes, this is the one and done camera for everything. So if you're a hybrid shooter and you fit in that category, then this is going to be the one for you. However, if you're any other sort of creator, then I recommend you don't get this camera. Instead, there's 2 other cameras that I would get instead, because if you have that sort of money, then you can get 2 cameras for the price of just this one. And this is where I think Sony have created an issue for themselves. Now you can get the Sony FX3 as your dedicated video camera, which has all of Sony's cine features and has been used in blockbuster films such as The Creator. And that can shoot at 4K up to 120 frames per second with no overheating, no issues whatsoever. And it has the best low light performance on the market with its 12 megapixel sensor. Then if you want a dedicated photography camera and even a hybrid camera to use as a B-roll, then I would get the Sony A7C Mark II. Now, this is the little brother to the Sony A7 IV, which can record at 4K up to 30 frames per second with no crop, oversampled from 7K. So you've got an incredible 7K image cropped down to 4K. And there's no crop with that at all when you're filming. And if you want to record slow motion at 60 frames per second, you'll get a 1.5 times crop, a Super 35 crop. So for the same price, you could buy the Alpha 1. You can buy an FX3 and a B-roll camera of the Sony A7C Mark II, which will come out at £5,500. You're saving £1,000 there. Now with the Sony A7C Mark II, that has a 33 megapixel sensor that can do 10 frames per second continuous shooting, which is more than enough megapixels for most people, more than enough quality for 90% of people, even professional photographers. I use the Sony A7 IV as my main camera, which is essentially the same camera, and that has been my main camera for 2 or 3 years, and I've never had any issues with it. So by getting these two cameras, if you wanted to, say, record an interview or do any sort of client work, you've now got an A and a B roll camera, both professional, both high quality, both shooting at 4K, both have a wide variety of options, and then you're saving £1,000. And if you want to then use that £1,000 to get a decent lens or some accessories, you could then do that. This is the issue, I think, with the A1 Mark II, is that it is an amazing camera, and yes, it's the best camera on the market, but the price of it, especially with the other options you've got out there, I don't think many people are going to go for it, because you could get an FX3 and an A7C Mark II for £1,000 less, and you've got all the same quality and features, and now you've got two cameras that you can use. And if you want to save even more money, I would get the A7C Mark II and a third-party camera like the DJI Osmo Pocket 3, which has a 1-inch CMOS sensor, and that can record at 4K up to 120 frames per second. It's good in low light, and it has a built-in gimbal. So you haven't got to spend another $500 on a gimbal, you've already got one. So for spending $2,500, you're getting an A7C Mark II and a DJI Osmo Pocket 3 with a built-in gimbal that can shoot in slow motion. So you've got all of the stuff you need for half the price. And this is the biggest issue, I think. There's so many good cameras on the market now that I'm not quite sure where this camera currently sits. When the Alpha 1 came out, it was the best on the market because there was other cameras that could do what it could do, but it was positioned as the best. Whereas now we've got the FX3 and all these other cameras and DJI's cameras that I just don't see a use case for the Alpha 1 Mark II. Even if I had $6,500 to spend on a camera, I wouldn't get this. I would get other cameras instead and have more cameras or more lenses. That would be what I would do. Now this video might divide opinion a little bit, but let me know in the comments below what you think. And if you are a content creator or a filmmaker that's looking for help to grow your channel and your audience, then click the link below to join my completely free community, and it's filled with like-minded creators, filmmakers, photographers who want to grow on social media and monetize their brand.